Guten Tag, willkommen to Anatomy and Physiology. Today we're going to talk about the chemical composition of bone. What are they made out of? There's two main parts of bones, living parts and non-living parts. The living parts include these two here, and then we have the non-living parts over there. So, let's start with the living stuff. The organic components include cells, specifically osteoblasts. Blast means to build. Osteocyte means mature. And we have osteoclast, which means to break down. And then we have this weird looking thing called the osteoid. Osteoid, this one here, includes ground substance and collagen fibers. And so it's kind of like the matrix. It's all the stuff around the outside here. It gives the bone flexibility and tensile strength, specifically because of the collagen. Collagen is very tough, and it allows our muscles to be somewhat bendy and not to break. Don't have enough collagen, your bone becomes very brittle. Then we have the inorganic components, the non-living parts called hydroxyapatite. So hydro, oxy, and then apatite. These are the mineral salts, the calcium, the phosphorus, and all the different types of minerals that we take in every day that just kind of fill in the blank spots. And then we have calcium phosphate, CaPO4. Let's see, what do I remember chemistry? 2 goes there, Ca3PO4? Yeah, phosphate. Yep, there it is. And it's what gives its bone its hardness. So you could drop a bone in acid, get rid of all these parts, and all you'll have left is a collagen, and you get a really rubbery bone. We're actually going to do that in lab. We're going to play with getting rid of one of the two components and see how it affects the bone. Okay. Bone development is referred to as either ossification or osteogenesis. You know, like genesis means to bring forth something, so osteobone, bring forth bone. This is a process of bone formation, and it occurs begins in the 8-week-old fetus. So they start out inside of you, just kind of amorphous without any shape or anything, and then after just a couple of weeks they start looking like a little human, and then that's when the bones begin to develop. There's two types of bone growth depending on where it occurs. First one is called intramembranous ossification, and this I can't spell. Bone develops from a fibrous membrane. And then we have endochondral ossification, which is bone forming by replacing a hyaline cartilage. And this one is relatively rare, and this one is more common. So we're going to take a look at the two kinds and see how they contrast and compare with each other. Okay, intramembranous ossification. This forms the flat bones of the skull and the clavicles. So like I said, this one is relatively rare because of the fact that it only occurs in your skull and your clavicles here. And what happens here is that fibrous connective tissue membranes are formed from mesenchymal cells. So if you look at this little picture here, we've got all these little mesenchymal cells right here, and they are the one that help to form the bone. So if we look at the picture, on the next slide is going to have all the steps, but I just want to look at the pictures here real quick. So we've got all these fibroblasts right around here, mesenchymal cells, and what they do is they create a little, what's called an ossification center, little area where bone growth begins. And there it is right there. And you can see we've got collagen in there as well. And these are the osteoblasts. So these are the cells that make the bone. And they're secreting these little things out here, which is called osteoid. And then they just keep doing this outward. So these guys are growing outward like this. And then after a while, they produce enough of the bone matrix, this kind of peachy stuff right here, that they create little houses for themselves. So some of them stay inside and they mature and become an osteocyte, which is a mature bone cell. But the ones on the outside, the osteoblasts, continue building, but now they're kind of building this way. They're adding more bone like this. So they're working inside out, but they're depositing on the outer surface. And then after a little while, then we see that the mesenchyme cells right here start to get a little bit thicker and start to form the periosteum, which is that outer coating of the bone. And then inside, the area, the spaces inside get a little bit bigger, and we've got blood vessels and such growing inside, and this forms the trabeculae, the spongy bone inside the flat bones. And then at the very end, we can see we've got osteoblasts still going to town, building this outer portion here. And we've got your periosteum on the outside here, and we got this nice spongy area inside. So let's take a look at the step-by-steps. Alright, step 1, we've got an ossification center appears in the fibrous connective tissue membrane. So that was that first picture where we get some cells in the middle, and here's all the mesenchyme just kind of all over the place. And so these cells in the middle make the ossification center. Second thing that's going to happen is that bone matrix is secreted within the fibrous membrane. So my little ossification center is starting to create bone around it. So it's starting to fill in everything around the cells with actual bone. Okay, then we get woven bone, which is kind of more the outside area that kind of turns into the compact bone, and periosteum. So the periosteum is that fibrous outer layer, like that. And then at the end, the bone collar of compact bone, so the woven bone turns into a thicker compact bone, like that. And the red marrow appears, and so in the middle, all these little holes inside get the red marrow, which is where the hematopoiesis occurs, is inside of there. And now what do we have is a nice little bone sandwich. We have the purple outer crust right there, which is the periosteum. We have the yellow inside, and then we have the marrow inside. So there's a little picture. I tried to find a good picture of actual bone occurring, but the more I look at this, the more I realize it's kind of hard to tell what's going on in there. So we'll refer to the picture on the previous page instead. Now, endochondral ossification, this is all your long bones and all the other bones, uses a hyaline bone model. So your body starts with a chunk of hyaline cartilage that is a model for the bone to grow. It begins at the center, kind of like the previous one did with an ossification center, and then grows kind of outwards. And as it grows, it actually eats away the middle area. So I'll show you that on the steps. Okay, the first thing is here's our model. Okay, so this is all hyaline cartilage. So it says step 1, a bone collar forms around the diaphysis of the hyaline cartilage model. Now it doesn't show it so much on this one right here, but on this one you can see this is the bone collar. So that just becomes the compact bone around the outside. And while this is going on, or how this is going on, is that the osteoblasts, the building cells, they secrete osteoid, which is all the cartilage or the connective tissue and things like that, against the hyaline diaphysis. So it's putting it against the hyaline inside of here. Okay, now the next thing that's going to happen is that the cartilage center, so in here, we're kind of still in this area, the hyaline begins to calcify and then cavitate. That means to become hollow, would be the best way to describe that word, to become hollow. And so where it was relatively solid, it is now starting to empty out and start to become hollow. So the next step then is that the periosteal bud invades the internal cavities and spongy bone form. So let's talk about what the periosteal bud is. It is an artery and a vein that goes and works its way in through a hole in the bone and then starts to spread out and takes over all different areas up here. And it also contains, it contains an artery and a vein, lymph tissue, nerve fibers, the ingredients for making red bone marrow, osteoblasts to build the bone, and osteoclasts to break down the bone. So we can see it here too, is that we have this main one that spreads out here, but we also get others that grow into the epiphyses too to help them grow and solidify as well. So now that we know what that is, let's go back up here. The periosteal bud invades the internal cavities, you can see right here, and spongy bone forms. So now that we have nutrients to keep the spongy bone alive, now we can have that. Okay, next, the diaphysis elongates. As you can see, it's starting to grow this way and this way. And then you get the medulla. So now we have an actual hollow cavity, which is the medullary cavity. So it starts growing over here, but they're giving it its own separate step over here. And then the epiphyses start to ossify. And so like we said, the blood vessels come in, and then we start to get the ossification of the tips of the bone as well. Whoop, let me go back one. And so that's kind of this and this one here. Now this one is a mature bone. This is like after the baby's been born. So when a baby's born, he's more like this. And so these are all separate, distinct bones from this bone here. But as you get older, then we've got the fusion of the different parts of the bone, and then this all just becomes one bone. Okay, so postnatal, so after birth, after baby, what happens? The long bones grow by interstitial growth in the epiphyseal plates, and so that's all right in here. And they grow in thickness by appositional growth. So remember the two, appositional and interstitial. We looked at that on previous ones. It's very similar to endochondral ossification in the fact that it grows, out and long. But basically, what's happening is that the epiphyses are kind of growing out. As you can see from these arrows here, this part's growing up, and then they meet in the middle, and then eventually the hyaline, where the epiphyseal plate is, actually solidifies into bone itself, and that's when you don't grow anymore. Okay, so growth in length. So we said we grow in length and width, so let's take a look at length. Similar to endochondral, we mentioned that already. Cartilage cells in the epiphyseal plate, so right in here, grow and push the epiphyses outward. So he's trying to push that part out while the long bone is actually being pushed down. Cartilage cells closer to the diaphysis die off, so the diaphysis is this part, and they calcify, forming spongy bones. So you can see right here, all that spongy bone is what they're talking about. Okay, the long bone growth stops when the epiphyses and diaphyses fuse and cartilage is replaced with bone. So right now he's pushing up, he's pushing down, up, down, and then eventually these guys will actually form bone and then just become one solid chunk. Growth in width or thickness is osteoblasts beneath the periosteum. So here's the bone, and so we have osteoblasts here beneath the periosteum. They're creating new bone matrix, and so they're pushing inwards like this. And the osteoclasts on the endosteal surface, so that would be the inside of the bone here. Let me get a different color for them. And these guys are eating away the bone. So you can kind of imagine that the bone is always growing this direction. So new bone is growing here, and then by the time it gets over to this side, it gets eaten up. And that keeps, so the inside, you can imagine your bone is always changing, which is kind of crazy. And if we take a look down here, here's your osteoblast. These are building, growing that way, growing that way. Osteoclasts, they're on the inside eating away. Kind of big cells. All right. Last thing, second to last thing, hormonal regulation of bone growth is all controlled by your anterior pituitary gland. So that little jobber right there is what's responsible for how tall you're going to get. When people have tumors on this, they get really, really big because it just continually presses on it, telling it to release hormones. Testosterone and estrogen also promote growth spurts during teens. So basically when you hit puberty and you get a huge spike in one of these two, that will tell your bones to grow. Up next, bone remodeling and repair. So see you guys later. Bye.